If you listen to any of my other shows, particularly iteration number 52, you know that earlier this year I had surgery on my eyes to correct a condition called strabismus. About a month ago, I got an email from a listener and a photographer who recently had a similar surgery, although I've since learned that her condition was much more dramatic than mine. I've never met anyone else with the same condition, let alone had the surgery to correct it. I responded to her email and asked if she'd be willing to have a conversation about how her experience compared to my own, specifically around how it shaped her approach to art, both as a viewer and as a maker. I'm Jeffrey Sidoris. I'm talking to Joe Mackby, and this is In Between.
What are we going to talk about today, Jeffrey?
Well, what are we going to talk about?
A day in my life?
A day in your life. Yeah, no. I want to talk about work versus the work. Mm-hmm. But I think what kind of inspired the whole thing was the email that you sent me after listening to the episode about my surgery, because you had the similar things. So maybe we can start there.
Yeah.
And talk about.
Yeah, that was super powerful.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, and maybe more powerful for me because I'd just been through something similar, but
right.
I wasn't expecting it. I had just been going reverse chronologically with your episodes, and came home from a day and put it on while I was eating my lunch, and just had to pause it and stop eating and cry, and then start it up again. And then I because I was going reverse chronologically, you were talking about anticipating the surgery. Mm-hmm. But I haven't
Which
known
was code
anybody.
for being terrified of
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, it's incredibly scary to have someone cutting your eyeballs.
Yeah.
And putting that, So
how was your strabismus different than mine? Because it sounds like yours was much more severe.
Well, I don't know you, and I haven't seen photographs of your strabismus, and now I wouldn't see it because I guess it's been cured. I was born with mine. Mm-hmm. I was born with hyperopia, rather severe hyperopia, which means that I was very farsighted. And one of the kind of symptoms or presentations with the farsightedness is to have the strabismus.
And was it both eyes for you, or
no? It was just my right eye, which is my non-dominant eye. Okay. And one of the consequences, and I don't know if you have this experience too, but one of the consequences of strabismus, and definitely of the severe hyperopia, is that my non-dominant eye pretty much went offline. Yeah, like my brain stopped asking it for visual information.
Same.
And so that eye would. It wasn't really doing much. And then if I tried to focus using both eyes, it would turn in quite dramatically. So I had almost no depth perception throughout my childhood, and some double vision, but I don't think I had the double vision like you did. And just in general, everything was blurry.
Right.
And I had just screaming headaches all the time, especially by the end of the day. Like I was one of those kids who would just put myself to bed at like 7:30 because I was just done.
Right.
I was just done. I could not.
Were you able to see at all without glasses? Like, could you read without glasses? Could you see anything?
Yeah, I was able to compensate for a time. And my parents did, well, I think my grandmother was really upset. My father's mother was really upset about the strabismus, and insisted that my parents take me to an eye doctor when I was maybe not even a toddler yet. And the eye doctor, this was the 70s, and the eye doctor said, well, she'll kind of let you know. You'll know when it's time.
Right.
And so this farsightedness runs in my father's side of the family. My father had it. My father's father had it. And, they were tough, Jewish immigrant kind of folks. And they just soldiered on. They were both voracious readers, and I loved to read, but I kind of compensated by memorizing things.
Mm. So
So I
you
put
wouldn't have to read them again and again?
right. So I
Yeah.
wouldn't have to
Yeah.
read them again. I got a lot of, it was probably very good for me. I got a lot of context clues. So I'd read part of what I needed to read.
Mm-hmm.
I would scan for important things. But as I got older and as school demanded that I read more and more, I found that I would put what I needed to read on a music stand and step away from it until I could sort of focus on it.
Mm-hmm.
I always sat in the back of the classroom whenever possible. But it wasn't until I started to get, like hit in the face in PE class in the fifth grade. And I started to really do poorly in school, which wasn't like me. I loved school. And so my parents took me off for some testing, mental age testing, IQ kind of stuff to see what is going on. And I took the test. The results are immaterial, but the administrator said, "Well, she's a bright girl, but have you noticed that she can't see very well? And she avoids tasks that involve looking at something for extended periods of time." So it was time. It was time. So at 10, I went and got those very, very thick glasses. I've sent you a picture.
Right.
They were uncomfortable. They were unflattering. They were ugly.
Yeah.
I think probably the word.
You said in your email that your grandmother, you used the word, she was horrified.
Grotesque.
Yeah. Is that,
Yeah.
I mean, was that communicated to you in those terms?
It was. I mean, it wasn't the only sort of body image thing that was communicated to me by my family, who I think were quite, it was California at the time. People were vain.
Were?
I don't know. I don't live in California anymore. I live in a place with, realistic expectations, I think, about what people look like. But,
Sure.
So yeah, no, my grandmother was really, really upset, but then she went and died. So, she probably would have championed or advocated for me and made sure that I had this taken care of much younger.
Mm-hmm.
My father was really busy. My mother was my mother. Yeah, it should have been taken care of earlier because it would have allowed me to, participate more fully.
Sure.
My mother, for example, was something of a photographer. She had worked in photography and occasionally would get the camera out to make photos of me. And she would have me close my eyes before the photo and then have me open them right before she would snap the shutter.
So they didn't have a chance to move, kind of thing?
They didn't have a chance to cross because I wasn't focusing. Or she would, make photos in profile or, have me look down or look to one direction or the other kind of thing. So I had a really strong awareness.
How did it affect outwardly how you experience the world?
So it's interesting about that. I have some of these really early memories of light, like the quality of light and being really interested in light. And I talked with my mother some years ago. I said, I remember this light, and I described it to her, like this quality of light, and I described it to her, and she said, "Oh, that was our place in Sausalito. The light is exactly how you describe it." And she said, "But you were 6 months old when we moved away from there." I said, "Well, I don't know." And then I went on to describe the light in the next place we lived, which was up on the hill with a view out toward the bay, out toward San Francisco. And I remember the fog, and I remember how the fog would burn off. And I just remember how the light would change as that happened. And we had these big picture windows that looked south. And I think that because I wasn't able to really focus on details, I was very captivated by light. And then as I got exposed to more art, I was very drawn to bold colors, geometric shapes, things that were, I think that's pretty normal for kids because the eyes come online in a certain way. You don't have that precise, detailed focus early on. But I think it's, 6 or 12 months, babies are able to focus. But I never was. So I was really drawn to very, bold, graphic kind of elements. And because I had really poor depth perception, everything in my world flattened into two dimensions.
Sure.
And so now as an artist, until my eye surgery and maybe since in the last year, I'm still kind of recreating that aesthetic, that way that I perceive the world, even all these years later, that I feel like I've flattened, that I struggle to incorporate depth into my work, because that's just not how I engage with what I see.
Well, and you shoot pretty wide, which doesn't tend to flatten things out. I mean, I'm surprised that, given how you experience perspective and depth perception, that you don't shoot longer, so that you do end up getting that compression and that flattening out.
Well, that's an interesting point. I hadn't really thought about that. I'm really uncomfortable with long lenses. The longest I have is like an 80 millimeter equivalent, maybe 85 kind of portrait lens, which I bring out if I have to. Like if I know I'm going to need to make people beautiful, I'll get that lens out. But
right.
Yeah, I don't know. That would be a really interesting exercise for me after the eye surgery, to go out with a longer lens.
It might be completely shocking to see how that perspective gets kind of compressed and flattened out. It might be uncomfortable, It
might be. That would be good, though.
Once you started to, you're getting a little older now and starting to make decisions around the kind of art that you respond to. Did your vision still affect some of those choices and responses? Because I know it did for me. It's one of the reasons that I've been drawn to, Rauschenberg and Rothko in particular, because there was nothing I had to focus on. I could just experience color, or Helen Frankenthal or de Kooning or some of the big people that for whom detail was not a prerequisite.
Yeah, and I had the exact same experience. And I don't know if we were, just because we both grew up in California at the same time, if we were exposed to the same traveling exhibitions, or if it really is a function of us having this kind of compromised visual experience. Absolutely. I mean, I was always drawn to abstract expressionism from a really young age. I would have said, at 3 or 4, I could have named Kandinsky and Klee probably as my favorite artists. And
I think Dr. Seuss was in my top.
Absolutely.
Shel Silverstein. What is the first, what's the first piece of art or exhibit that you remember?
Well, we had a lot of art in our home, and we had a lot, by an American artist living in France named Johnny Friedlander, who I think died maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So I remember those well. In fact, I'm looking at one of them right now that I have in my living room. They're abstract lithographs, but a well-known artist. Let me think.
I had a very different experience. I think the first thing I remember was the touring.
You're going to say Tutankhamun, aren't you?
I am. Yeah, at LACMA.
I saw it in San Francisco.
Yeah,
probably at the same time. What year was that?
Oh God, I don't know. It was school. It was a school field trip, so it must have been. Oh gosh,
you know what? 80.
You know what? I don't know.
The internet.
LACMA. Let's see.
No.
1978.
78. Okay.
Yeah. So that's what it would have been. It was 1978.
So I was 7.
I was, what would I have been? 11.
Oh my God, you're old.
Thanks.
Just kidding.
It's been a while since I've been reminded of that in a podcast, so thank you.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing.
Huge impression on me. I mean, huge. I remember it very vividly.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I thought of, other than it taking place at an art museum, I don't know that I thought of it as art, because for me, art was something that happened in a frame on a wall or as a sculpture. I saw it more as like artifacts, I guess.
I was late to the game in art. I mean, we had paintings, yes, but they were, seascapes or buildings that you would probably now find in a thrift shop or Goodwill or something. They weren't, it was couch art,
I have friends who collect that.
Yeah.
So.
No, I mean, no disrespect, because now it's coming back, but I didn't know anybody by name until probably high school, because the other than Disney animators and, Frank Frazetta and Boris Vallejo and, sort of sci-fi illustrators. But in terms of,
I don't think you should discount that. I mean,
no, I'm not at all. But there are those who
you've read Dan Winters.
Absolutely.
And he's going to say they belong on the same
and they do
level.
But at the time they were genre artists, and they were not considered art with a capital A. Even though they influenced and affected, culturally, I think just as much as some of the big people who we would kind of refer to now. But I didn't know any, I didn't know de Kooning or Pollock or, I mean, maybe Monet, Van Gogh, Picasso, maybe. Did you see that exhibition of the Impressionists that went through in the early 80s? Because that's the one that really made a huge impression on me. Not that I remember.
I think that I responded to it because it gave me, as I said, I was really drawn to as you were, to the color fields artists. And my mother always liked Impressionist art. But I didn't really grow up with any of it in my landscape, in my habitat. But there was an exhibition in San Francisco. I want to say, I feel like it was the year that Jenny, What's Your Number, 8675309 song
Tommy Two-Tone
was on.
Yeah.
Because I just have this memory. Maybe I've conflated two memories, but I have this memory of like us singing that song on the bus to go see the Impressionists. And so I felt, I mean, at that point I was wearing glasses, but I felt like, and I should say the glasses only did so much. It wasn't like all of a sudden I had this 20/20 vision. No, all of a sudden I could read, but I still had headaches. I still had poor depth perception. I was still getting hit in the face with balls in PE, the whole story. But just back to the art. I was so
1981, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah,
was the
Jenny. Yeah, Tommy Two-Tone.
Yeah, so maybe it was maybe I was 10 years old. Maybe I hadn't gotten glasses yet, but I remember that. I just remember not wanting to get back on the bus. I remember wanting to live with that work. I remember in particular the Georges Seurat, the Afternoon on the Island of the Grand Jatte, or whatever it is. The classic one with the woman with the bustle.
Yeah,
and
sure.
The pointillism.
The pointillism, yeah.
It's massive. I don't know if you've seen it in person, and that might not have even been there. But in my mind, like that's how I remember seeing Seurat and seeing like that approach to representation.
Interesting that you would pick that out, because it's arguably a lot more detailed than the other things that you've mentioned.
Well, and I think it made such an impression because I never would be able to do that. I never would. I mean, to this day, I don't know if I could do that. I can certainly see well enough to do it now. But at the time, I mean, there was just no way. So I was fascinated with it for that reason, maybe. I was raised with an appreciation for art and music, but and my grandfather thought everything that I did was just beautiful. And he was an artist, my father's father. But he died when I was quite young, and I didn't have, professional art or the artist's life or any of that, or even professional music modeled for me. And it was never something I thought of. I thought of art as something you did in school or something you did in your room on your own, and then something you went to the museum and looked at, or the gallery and you looked at. And so,
but it sounds like you were surrounded by it. You had said earlier that.
Sure, I was surrounded by it, but it came as, it came as a surprise to me when I left home and double majored in math and Russian, and devoted myself to that to the best of my ability.
Okay. So now you're at the present.
Years old. Yeah, I'm in the present.
You're a photographer and a linguist.
And a linguist.
Where did Russian and math? How did that fit into the mix?
Well, yeah. So this is my point exactly. Like I didn't know I was an artist. I didn't even know I was creative. I knew that I loved to sing. I loved to dance. I loved art. But
so it naturally makes sense to major in Russian.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I don't have. I was just encouraged to be serious about the things.
By whom? By family? By friends?
By family. Yeah. And I never thought of myself as like. I never got a lot of positive feedback for the things I made in art class. And I look at them now, and I came across my sculptures that I made in, 8th grade or something, in a painting I made in the 7th. And, I understand why I probably didn't get any positive feedback or win any awards. I hadn't been putting in the miles. Like a lot of kids, they're drawing constantly, they're tracing, they're studying. And, I hadn't been doing that. But I had been training my eye in other ways. And so I went off to college and was really struggling academically.
Back up for 1 sec, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Did your strabismus, did that affect how your parents saw your possibility in terms of art?
I think that my parents never considered my possibility in terms of art. In fact, if we fast forward from the time I left home to several years later, when by this time I had discovered photography and had abandoned all quote unquote serious pursuits, I came home for a visit, triumphant, jubilant, because I had gotten a full scholarship to art school. Still never having taken an art history class, never majoring in art, nothing. So, I had done this all by myself, and I came home and they said, what do you think you're doing? You're not going to go to, blankety blank art school.
Did they really say blankety blank?
I don't know what they said. They might have.
Were they cartoon characters, your parents?
I wish. Oh my gosh, I wish. No, my parents were very formal, very serious people, and no child of theirs was going to become an artist.
But you had an artist in the family, did you not?
My grandfather was an artist. That's right.
So how was his work negated?
Well, he taught drafting. He had gone to architecture school and he taught drafting. And then, in his retirement, which was lengthy because he lived to be almost 100,
wow.
He painted watercolors. And I'm looking at one of his watercolors of Tiburon right now. And so I grew up with his work around me too.
But your parents didn't see the value in that somehow.
No, they saw it. I mean, my parents were very creative people, but they saw it as like a hobby. And, my father came of age in the Depression, and had wanted to be an academic and study comparative literature. And he was the only child of Jewish immigrants. And of course, this was pre-World War II, but there was a lot of anti-Semitism. And, it's like, we haven't come this far for you to, be an academic or for you to be a creative type.
Right.
You're going to med school and becoming a doctor. So I think, there was a little bit of, and he also, he was a beautiful singer and he sang all his life, and it was music that brought my parents together. It was how they met. But that was always something you kind of did on the side. Like, it's lovely to be an artist, but that's not what you
on the weekends
do with your life. Right. It's on the weekends. Exactly. So that was the message I got. Whether that was what they meant to tell me. I don't know, but that was my interpretation of their message. And, in reading Art and Fear and in reading The War of Art, I feel like I had probably internalized a lot of messages from society and from my parents, but also used their, I did kind of spring it on them, but I used their reaction as an excuse to hit the eject button. Like, oh, well, maybe they're right. Maybe I shouldn't go to art school. Maybe I don't have what it takes. Maybe the imposter syndrome stuff that
Sure.
I had been deaf to.
Sure.
Because I didn't know. I just literally I just stumbled into a dark room one day. Like I had and it was not a deliberate thing. Like, maybe this Russian and math thing isn't for me. Maybe I'm really a photographer. And it wasn't like that. It was just literally stumbling into a dark room, falling in love with it, and devoting the next 18 months to it, or 16 months, until I got this scholarship. And then it was like a switch had flipped. And yes, I've talked with my therapist about this. It was like a switch had flipped. Like all that imposter syndrome noise just came in. Like, oh, well, my parents are, they're adults and they're smart people.
Right.
And
they became the voice of resistance for you.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So I never took another photograph until 2.5, 3 years ago.
And that was, but now when was your surgery?
My surgery was a little over a year ago, at the end of last summer of last year. And so my surgery was very different from yours because the strabismus wasn't the focus of, pardon the pun, focus of the correction. What they were correcting was the extreme farsightedness. And as a happy byproduct, the strabismus would be corrected as well.
So were you getting to a point where glasses technology wasn't able to correct for it? Like you were getting to the limits of what could...
Passed. Yeah, I had already passed the limit.
Wow.
And my ophthalmologist after my surgery said, I don't even know how you were functioning. Like you were...
Really?
Yeah, I don't know how you were doing as much as you were able to do. And, I didn't, it should have been really obvious to me, but I wasn't connecting the migraines and the headaches to my vision. Mm-hmm. And so I had no expectation that those would go away with the surgery, and they immediately went away, even after I had my first eye done.
So you had them done separately?
I had them done separately.
Okay.
They did the dominant eye first.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, that seems dumb. Shouldn't you practice on the non-dominant eye and try that one out first?
How long between surgeries on the two?
It was a week.
Okay.
It typically is 2 weeks, but I said, hey, can we do this a little faster? So I had them a week apart, and I'm either like missing the gene for fear, like the guy who free climbs. What's his name?
That was just in the Free Solo movie.
Yes. I'm kidding. I'm not missing that gene because I do experience fear normally. But I was pretty confident going in. I didn't have the same.
Oh my God, I was terrified.
Yeah, I was so ready. I was so ready because I was miserable. I was so constrained by my vision. And I wasn't able to, I was concerned that as an artist that I wasn't going to be able to do the things. And as I've revealed to you, I have been very late to learning how to process my images, my digital images. Mm-hmm. I think because I couldn't sit at the computer, I couldn't look at a computer for more than 10 or 15 minutes. I couldn't read the magazines. I couldn't read the manuals. I literally could not read them without getting a headache. So, the pleasure for me was the process of going out with the camera in my hand and capturing the light falling on things.
Sure.
That really, at that, until my eye surgery, I felt like that was all I was doing. I was documenting light.
So I'll ask you the same question you asked me. How has your work changed post-surgery, if at all?
Well, I think it's at first I'm not sure it did. You've seen the project that I did about, I guess, 2 months after my surgeries. I had a little portfolio of things called New Eyes, and it was the first images I took after my surgery when I had only one eye done and was just pointing my camera, not even sure. I was just drawn to like shapes because it took me a few months for my eyes to come fully online, for my brain. I still think my brain is adapting, but yeah, it was a while before my brain and eyes learned to perceive harmoniously.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I had an opportunity to go to the Pine Mountain Settlement School, which is a magical place deep in the mountains of Kentucky's Appalachia, and it's built by Italian stonemasons in this setting with the hills all around, and the light kind of comes in, bouncing off of those hills and into the valley. So I was there for a long weekend workshop, and just kind of like devoured the place in a sense. Like I could not make enough photographs.
Right.
Like I was insatiable with it. So I feel like that was the first where I was starting to make photographs that were about something instead of something.
Right. But they're still very much about the light. I mean, I'm looking through them now, and
very, very much about the light. Yeah.
The light is still the star of the show in many of the photographs here.
But I feel like that was the first time where I felt like my work could be more about than of.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's been the gift that this eye surgery has. And it could just be I'm maturing as an artist, but that I feel like my work now is increasingly about things and less of things. And I'm less concerned about being inspired by the light and more inspired by the ideas.
What was the last project before your surgery? Pine Mountain is the first. What came directly before Pine Mountain?
Cuba might be the thing because Cuba was about 6 months before my eye surgery. So my photographs from Cuba might be the best representation of what I was doing right before. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't really a project. That was just, me in Cuba with a friend.
Right.
And I occasionally made some photographs.
If I'm looking at these, and I hope this doesn't come out wrong, the pictures are flatter.
Mm-hmm. Which ones?
Cuba. The Cuba pictures,
yeah.
they feel like there's less dynamic range. There's less between the light and the dark, where they are about the place, versus the Pine Mountains shots feel more like they are about the light. Mm-hmm. Again, I don't mean that offensively at all. They're just an observation.
Yeah, I'm not offended by that. Well, and it's really hard to compare the light in Cuba in December to the light in Kentucky, the mountains of Kentucky in October. But some of it too could be the film simulation. So at Pine Mountain, I probably was running classic chrome on my Fuji, and then in Cuba, I was just in standard, and I have done zero post processing to either of those photographs, either of those bodies. They're 100% straight out of camera,
and that is perfectly okay, regardless of what you read online.
Right. Thank you. Yes, we've had that conversation. That was very liberating, by the way, just to hear that from you, because I know that you are a student of the things.
Right.
And to me, that sometimes goes along with someone who takes advantage of a lot of the processing opportunities. I'm not acquainted with your photography work.
There's not a lot to be acquainted with, really. And most of the time,
you're depriving the world.
I don't know about that. If I'm not shooting JPEG, if I am shooting RAW, I will bring the RAW files into Capture One and apply some sort of preset, some sort of the film styles that I've got are terrific, but I use 3 or 4 of them, and then I'll make local adjustments, play with a curve adjustment, and that's it. I mean, if I spend more than a minute or two on a photograph, that's a rarity. And
do you think that relates to your vision too, or your eyes?
I don't think so, because for a while I was deep into compositing.
Okay.
I mean, I've been using Photoshop since version 3, and it was for a long time my go-to. I would bring everything into Photoshop, and
so you're not screen averse, and you're not.
No, but I got to a point where all of that seemed like there was no cohesive narrative to it. There was no reason for it. It was just because I could. Mm-hmm. Whereas somebody like Gregory Crewdson, who will combine multiple shots into one, but there's a reason behind it, and it doesn't look like he did. You know, it's why I like the movies of David Fincher. Fincher uses CG in all kinds of ways, but you don't notice it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't look at a David Fincher movie and go, wow, that was some great CG. He keeps it very subtle, and it has to serve the story. And I found that with my own compositing work, it was because I could, or, you know, look how clever this is, but it wasn't really moving the image forward in that way. Now I've been noodling on a new body at work for a long time that will need to be composited, but it will lean more toward that Crewdson Fincher vein.
Well, I look forward to seeing that.
Thanks. Me too. Yeah. If it ever happens.
You excited about it? Like, I get really jazzed when I think about future projects.
Yes. I mean, I'm excited about doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
And the hardest thing, I don't know about the hardest, but one of the hard things for me to let go of is how it will be received by others, regardless of how it's received by me.
Well, I know you're very concerned with audience, but I'm saying that in a neutral way.
Yeah.
I
want to connect with them. I want to connect with an audience.
But I think too, like you are so you're so interested in process, and I think you derive a lot of pleasure from process. That's my impression of you.
Yeah.
That I think if you found ways to motivate yourself to be in that process more, that you really make a lot of inroads quickly. I think you'd get moving on some of these projects more quickly than you even realize. And that would feel really good. And whether you commit to a week of posting every day or once a week for a month or something, just like find a way to have accountability to an audience, or not to an audience, but certainly to yourself, like to get moving. And I think if you want to approach it from, gee, I wonder what these new eyes can do, do it that way. Like, you and I are still trying to figure out what our post-surgery eye surgery art is going to look like.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's
exciting.
Fair.
Like,
it is exciting.
Do it. Just do it.
Yeah.
Do it already.
what? Focus.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what it looks like, and the last several months have been sort of retooling what I expect from myself and what I want to focus on moving forward, and we'll see how it shakes out. I'm several months post surgery, and I still wake up every morning and go look in the mirror to make sure they're straight.
Oh yeah.
Or I'll ask Adrienne, are they still straight? I
totally understand. Yeah.
She'll said, yes, they're still straight. Stop. Yes.
But how's that affecting your identity too? I mean, do you feel different?
Yeah, I do. In fact, I have a friend who, and I've spoken about her many times. She's a paper conservator at the National Gallery, and she's very intimidating to me. And I have found that pre-surgery, I wouldn't look her in the eye. I would be off axis, or I would be looking at something else whenever we would have a conversation. And the last couple times we've had in-person conversations, and because she is one of those people who locks eyes when she's talking to you. Like she's a very attentive listener, and she's lovely to have a conversation with. And so I have found that post-surgery, I now am more locked into in-person conversations. Even talking to Adrienne, I'm more engaged and straight on, instead of having to try and compensate so you don't see what I did see. Mm-hmm. You don't see all that I did see. Mm-hmm. So I think that's been the biggest thing. And I think in terms of the work that I do, it's opened up the possibility and the opportunity to have in-person conversations where I can feel like I'm in the moment and present in the conversation, not wondering or worrying about how you see me sitting across from me.
Do you think it's affecting your relationship with podcasting? Does it want to make you change?
I think it
how
will
much
moving
time you
forward.
devote to it?
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, the next show that I'm launching in 2020 is all in person. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be Skype. It's not going to be remote. It's going, well, I mean, I say that it's not going to be, the intention is not to do it remotely. The intention is to have all of these conversations in person.
And will they be on YouTube kind of in person, or will they still just be audio?
No, they'll still just be audio.
But you'll have them. I see. You'll have them in person.
Yeah. My love affair with audio is deep. I mean, I grew up listening to radio and listening to DJs who played what they want and had opinions and beliefs and thoughts. And it wasn't a playlist culture then. It was freeform radio. And you listened to these guys and girls because of who they were and because of what their tastes were and what they thought about things, and
they're influencers.
Absolutely. Before there were influencers. Yeah. I mean, you're listening to Joe Benson and Meg Griffin and all of these people that kind of affected not only the music, but they were newscasters, they were social commentary, they were all of that stuff. And there's a different quality to a conversation that happens in person than does over Skype, over the phone, whatever it is. And I want to explore that as a new body of work. Do you think that since the eye surgery, you'll reevaluate your ambition level with regard to podcasting, or just in general?
In general, like what is possible for you?
I think so.
In your own mind.
I mean, I think that in a large degree, I've hidden behind Skype and podcasting remotely because I've been uncomfortable face to face, especially with strangers. I mean, people that I know and people that have been in my life for a long time, you feel like those people are more forgiving. Mm-hmm. But having conversations with strangers, especially lengthy conversations where you have time to sit and look at me and realize that something's off, something's not right about this guy, visually speaking. I think that has changed dramatically. And I think my desire to explore that is 100% a result of the success of the surgery. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is like getting a new pair of eyes. It is like getting, a new sort of, not to be overly dramatic, but a new lease on life. And my surgeon, I've told this story. I was terrified going in. I was ready to pull the plug. I was ready to go home. Forget it. I'm not going to do this. I'm terrified. And, like I said, I've told this before, where she knelt down beside me and she said, "Don't worry, I'm going to change your life." Mm-hmm. And she did, 100%. So to anyone who is out there who is listening, and I've gotten such wonderful email since talking about the surgery publicly from people who have been in similar conditions to ours, similar situations to ours, where their either their quality of their vision or the strabismus that they have endured has gotten to a point where they can no longer endure it. And to hear that it can change, that it will change, the responses have been incredible. And I would say to any of you who are listening, who, if you have the ability to change it, yes, it's terrifying, but it is so incredibly worth it, because it's like seeing the world differently. And more importantly, it feels like the world sees you differently. And you have experienced similar taunting and teasing and just almost a marginalization of as a result of this, so I don't know.
Well, and mine was partnered with essentially a disability. I mean, I was legally blind without my glasses. And even with my glasses, I was still struggling to function at a normal level. I was starting to bump my car into things. I couldn't read certain types of fonts and certain size fonts and at certain times of day. And so I was organizing my life around the good hours that I would have with my eyes. And to go from a life of that, and from it becoming increasingly difficult to, thinking of myself. I never used this label for myself until afterwards, but I was operating with a disability.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the additional how people perceive me with the
Sure.
strabismus, which didn't present very much when I wore my glasses, but as soon as I took them off, my eye would cross immediately.
Mm-hmm.
But my glasses were incredibly thick. I was always, the woman with the glasses.
Right.
That was always, oh, Joe, she's the woman with the glasses.
So do you wear corrective lenses at all anymore?
I have no correction whatsoever
Wow.
now. I have.
Wow, that's remarkable. See, I still have to wear glasses.
Miraculous.
Yeah.
And I don't have to worry when I travel. Like when I went to Cuba, I had the glasses on my face.
Right.
If something had happened to those glasses, I would have just, they would have just had to put an eye mask on me, and I would have had to be led around till the end of my trip. And that was my biggest. I wasn't worried about any of the other things that you might worry about going to a place like Cuba. That was the only thing.
It was only what if my glasses break? What if my glasses break?
Because I couldn't. My glasses were $1,000.
Oh my gosh!
Just the lenses alone were like $600 and something just to get the lenses, and then you want some nice frames because you wear them on your face all day, right?
Right.
So $1,000 for a pair of glasses. I didn't have the money. I'd rather spend the money going to Cuba than on a second pair of glasses to stay home,
Right.
So I made that choice.
Well played.
But now, no contact lenses, no glasses, no reading glasses, no nothing. No, but the weird thing is I can't wear sunglasses.
Really? Why?
Yeah. Something about that I require a lot of contrast to have the binocular vision. So once I put a tint in front of my eyes, it reduces the contrast, and it's almost like I've gone blind. It's a really weird thing. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I can wear like very light amber tinted glasses. And this is something I might start experimenting with now that it's been over a year since my surgery. But, it makes sense. You've just had eye surgery, put on dark glasses, and I put the dark glasses on and be like, where'd the world go? But yeah, it's, I sent you that picture of me as a child. That little girl is still inside me. Mm-hmm. That the little girl with the crossed eyes, whose grandmother thought she was ugly, and whose mother, wouldn't take a lot of photos of her. I look at how richly documented my parents' life was before I was born, and then how few photographs there are with me in them. And I know that's because of my eyes.
Yeah.
And that hurts.
Yeah. How could it not?
And then, I have all those photographs. With the big glasses, and I am miserable in those photographs. Like you can tell that I don't feel well. I don't feel like I can engage with the world. I'm not like looking at the photographer in a natural way. And then, I got into an age where I could make decisions for myself, and I started to wear contact lenses and sort of function with those. But, I'm still that little girl on the inside.
Is it subsiding? So as we get further post-surgery, does that little girl?
But I don't want her to go away too quickly, because I feel like it could be very fruitful with my work. I think it's something that I'm still wanting to explore in my photography. And it was kind of funny. I had to liquidate the contents of my parents' house this year. And that's
an awful process.
It is an awful process.
Yeah, it's a horrible process.
My parents really enjoyed acquiring things. Mm-hmm. My mother is probably a hoarder. And there was a lot of redundancy, let's just say. But so I was very
backup copies of things.
I was very overwhelmed. And there was a lot of it was very emotional.
Right. I
was very attached to my parents. I was their only child together, and we were, very close. And so I had to hire professionals, and there was a lot of decision making to be done every day.
Because of the volume, or because of the impact on you?
Both. But, they came in, and were starting to donate things, just out the door. Stuff just started going out the door. And there was a box of eyeglasses that I was putting together that was ostensibly for the Lions Club. Mm-hmm. And I had this moment where I was like, I need those glasses for a project. Mm-hmm. But they had already been donated. And I said, well, I need to get them back. And they looked at me like, you can't get those back. It's like, no, you have to tell me which Lions Club, where did you take which box? Because I'm sure it's not too late.
Right.
You just have to let it go. I'm like, you don't work with artists, do you?
Right.
You don't understand. This is
we don't let things go.
you don't understand. This is like
we chew on things for years, whether we need to or not.
Yes. So I kind of wish I had the glasses from my father and my grandfather, which are similarly very thick and debilitating kind of glasses. And so I kind of wish I had those for my work. But I to get to your question, I feel like that little girl is going to make an appearance or two in the coming years through my photography.
Somehow, yeah.
She certainly has in my poetry, but I think to represent her or represent my experience of maybe grieving her or letting her go or nurturing her or something, that is going to appear in my photography for sure.
Subscribe to In Between in your favorite podcast app. You can also get every episode of In Between, as well as my other shows, Process Driven and Iterations, all in one feed by subscribing to Jeffrey Sidoris Everything. If you're enjoying the show, I'd love it if you'd consider leaving a review or a rating on iTunes or sharing it on social media. Connect with me on Instagram and Twitter at Jeffrey Sidoris, that's JeffreySadoris, or on my website at jeffreysidoris.com. And just a reminder, this episode happened because Jo reached out and shared her story. If you've got an interesting story to tell, email me at talkback@jeffreysidoris.com. I'd love to hear from you. And you can find Jo on Instagram at Jo Mackby, that's JOMACKBY, or by visiting her website at jomackby.com. As always, thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate you being here, and I'll talk to you on the next one.